My name is Anna. I am 27 years old and I live in the suburbs of Seattle, Washington. My life has never been calm, especially after my mother married Michael. I was 15 and he was 45. Michael has always been a person who is used to being in control. He owns a small logistics company, delivering goods all over the state. My mother saw him as a reliable husband, but from the very beginning I felt that he did not look at me the way a stepfather should. His gaze lingered longer than usual. He asked questions about my personal life. He was interested in things that did not concern him. I attributed it to his character. I thought that he just wanted to be closer to me as a daughter. But over time, I realized that I was wrong. After graduating, I had a hard time finding a job. I had a degree in business administration, but all the jobs I could find were asking for experience, which I didn't have. My student loan debt was mounting, and it was getting harder to live with my mom and Michael. My mom suggested I talk to him because he had an opening in his office for an assistant. I didn't want to work for Michael because I knew what he was like. But I had no choice. Last year, I went to his office and he immediately agreed to hire me. He said he would teach me everything I needed to know and that I would quickly rise in the company. I thought it was a chance to start a career, so I agreed. That's when it all started. The job seemed simple. I sat at a desk in the reception area, answered phones, kept records of deliveries, sent emails to clients. The office was small, only about 10 people, including me. Michael often came to see me, checked on me, asked if I needed to explain anything. At first it seemed normal, but then he began calling me into his office for no particular reason. Sometimes it was to discuss the weekly plan, sometimes to bring him documents that he could take himself. He said that he wanted me to get used to responsibility, that it was part of my future career. And then he began to hint that if I behaved well, I would get more than just a salary. For example, a promotion or even a share in some project. I did not immediately understand what he meant, but I agreed to give it a try. People started whispering about me at the office. My colleagues noticed that Michael spent more time with me than with others. Someone once called me his right hand, and it sounded like a joke. I was angry, but I couldn't say anything. After all, I really depended on this job. Michael acted as if everything was fine. He was calm, smiling, joking. My mother didn't know anything. She was happy that I finally got a job and praised Michael for helping me. But I kept quiet. The audience is probably wondering why I didn't quit right away. I asked myself this question. But then I thought I could keep everything under control. I was wrong. This was just the beginning, and from there everything got much more complicated. First, voltage. Working in Michael's office had become a routine for me. I'd arrive at 9 in the morning, turn on my computer, check my email, answer calls from clients, and check delivery dates. The office was small, just one large room with partitions, a kitchen in the corner, and Michael's private office behind a glass door. The coworkers were of different ages, but everyone was even-tempered, without much friendship. Michael arrived later, usually around 10. He'd walk into the office, greet everyone with a loud good morning, but always stop near my desk. "Anna, do you look great today? Did you sleep well?" he'd say, looking at me a little longer than he did at the others. His voice was low and confident, and his eyes would rest on me as if he were waiting for a reaction. I'd say something like, "Thank you, I'm fine," trying not to look up. He wore his usual shirts with the sleeves rolled up, and he smelled of cologne sharp, with a hint of wood. Sometimes he would adjust his hair or his collar, and I noticed that he was doing it on purpose to attract attention. At first, he just asked me to stay late after work. He said he needed to check invoices or prepare reports for the next day. I sat at my desk until 6 or 7, typing up documents, checking figures. Michael would come in, ask how I was doing, and then leave. I thought that was normal. An assistant was supposed to help. But after a couple of weeks, everything changed. One day, he called me into his office and said, "Anna, you're too good for this routine. Let me show you how to manage projects." I agreed because I wanted to learn. He turned on his computer, opened up spreadsheets with shipping data. We sat at his desk, and he leaned closer than he needed to. His shoulder was almost touching mine, and his elbow was next to my hand. He was explaining something about logistics, but his tone was softer than usual. "You're a fast learner, Anna. I knew I was right about you," he said, looking into my eyes. Then he smiled and added, "It's a pleasure to work with you." I felt my cheeks begin to burn, but I just nodded. He leaned back in his chair, looking at me, and I quickly looked away to the screen. My coworkers began to notice that I was spending more time with Michael. The office was quiet, but rumors spread quickly. One day, I went into the kitchen to get coffee and heard Linda, the accountant, whisper to someone, "She's his shadow now," following him around. Another coworker, a driver named Tom, I think, chuckled and said, "Well, she's new, she's trying to curry favor." They didn't know that it wasn't my idea, that Michael was the one calling me. I left the kitchen without getting my coffee, and I felt the eyes on me all day. It made me angry, but I kept quiet. I didn't want to explain what was going on, because I didn't really understand it myself. Michael, on the other hand, was calm. He joked with everyone, discussed orders, but with me his jokes were different. "Anna, you saved my day today. What would I do without you?" he'd say, winking. Or, "You're the best-looking person in this office, you know that?" I responded with something neutral, like thanks for the compliment, but inside I felt awkward. He was clearly enjoying the way I was reacting. One day, he left me a note on the table. Just a piece of paper that said, "Stay late today, need to talk." I finished reading it after lunch and spent the rest of the day wondering what he wanted. After 6, the office was empty. Everyone had gone home except for the two of us. I knocked on his door and walked in. Michael was sitting at his desk, leafing through some papers. "Sit down, Anna," he said, pointing to the chair opposite. I sat down, and he stood up and went to the cabinet in the corner. He took out a bottle of water, poured 2 glasses, and handed me one. As he handed it to me, his fingers brushed mine, and he didn't move his hand. "You know, Anna, you could be someone big here," he began, looking down at me. "I need someone I can trust. You want to grow, don't you?" I nodded, although my insides clenched. He smiled, sat back down and continued, "I can give you more responsibilities, more opportunities. But you have to be on the same page with me." It sounded like a normal job offer, but something in his tone and look said otherwise. I said, "I'll try," and he nodded. "Okay. We'll discuss the details tomorrow," he finished. I went home thinking it was just a career conversation. But his behavior was already beyond professional. The next day he was more friendly with me than with others. In the morning he brought me coffee. He just put the cup on the table and said, "Here you go, you deserve it." My colleagues looked at each other, but said nothing. Later, he called me into his office to show me a new contract. We were standing at the table. He leaned over the papers, and his hand accidentally lay next to mine. He did not remove it right away, but looked at me and said, "You are doing well, Anna. I like your energy." I said thank you and stepped back, but he just smirked. At that moment, I realized that he was flirting. This was not like a normal boss praising an employee. It was something personal. Listeners, you probably think that I should have stopped this. I told myself the same thing. But then I thought that I could keep my distance, that this was just his manner of communication. I was wrong. The tension between us was growing, and I didn't know how far it would go. This was just the first step, and it had already changed everything. Working with Michael was becoming increasingly strange. I would come into the office as usual, but now he was paying more attention to me. In the morning he would say hello to everyone, but he would always add something just for me. "Anna, you look as fresh as spring today," he would say, smiling so hard that I didn't know where to look. He began calling me into his office more often. Sometimes it was business, to discuss orders or check accounts, but often he would simply say, "Sit with me while we work on a plan." I would sit down, and he would start talking about work, but his eyes would wander to me, not to the papers. One evening he asked me to stay. It was already around 7. The office was empty. I went in to see him sitting at his desk with a mug of coffee. "Anna, sit down. Let's talk about something other than work," he said. I sat down. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me. "You're not just an assistant, are you? You have potential," he began. Then he added, "I like the way you carry yourself. Calm, but with character." His voice was soft, almost gentle. He stood up, went to the window, looked out at the street. "You know, I haven't met anyone like you in a long time," he said, turning around. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there. He returned to the desk, sat closer to me and continued, "We could work well together. Not just in the office." It was a hint, and I got it. I said, "I want to concentrate on work," but he just smiled. "Of course, Anna, work is important. But so is rest." He leaned a little closer, and I could smell his cologne. His hand was on the table next to mine, but he did not touch me. "You don't mind relaxing sometimes, do you?" he asked. I stood up, said I had to go, and left. He did not stop me, but I heard him laugh quietly. The next day he acted as if nothing had happened, but became even more attentive. He brought me coffee and said, "You left quickly yesterday. I didn't have time to finish." I thanked him and went to my desk. The whispers were getting louder. Linda once asked, "Are you his personal assistant now?" I told her I was just doing my job, but she chuckled. Michael ignored it. He continued to flirt, winking and saying things like, "You brighten up this office." I tried to act calm, but inside I was tense. Listeners, you probably think I could have quit. But the job held me, and his talk of a career was convincing. It was the night that changed everything. We were getting closer, and I didn't know how to stop it. The tension between Michael and me was growing. I would come to the office, do my job, but his presence was now constant. He began to find more reasons to keep me around. In the morning, he would come to me with some small questions. "Anna, look at this bill, something doesn't add up." I would check, and he would stand next to me, looking not at the papers, but at me. "You're attentive, I like that," he would say, smiling slightly. His voice was calm, but there was some kind of play in it. I would answer briefly, try not to look him in the eye, but he would not leave until I finished. One day he called me into his office after lunch. "Anna, I have a proposition for you," he said as I walked in. He was sitting at his desk, holding a pen and tapping it on a folder. I sat down opposite him and he continued, "You're doing well. I think it's time to give you more responsibility. How about taking on a new project? A separate office, higher salary." I was surprised, but nodded. "What do you need to do?" I asked. He stood up, went to the shelf, took out a folder and put it in front of me. "These are deliveries for a large client. I want you to take charge of this. But I need you to be closer to me," he said. I clarified, "What do you mean closer?" He looked at me and replied, "More time together. Meetings, discussions. Sometimes after work." His tone was businesslike, but his eyes said something else. A couple of days later, he asked me to stay in the evening. We worked on the project until 8. The office was empty, the only light on was in his office. He sat next to me, showed me documents, explained details. Then he put the papers down and said, "You're great, Anna. I like the way you understand." He moved closer, his knee lightly touching mine under the table. I froze, but did not move away. "You understand that I want to help you, right?" he added, looking into my eyes. I nodded. He continued, "But I need you to trust me. Completely." His hand lay on the table, his fingers almost touching mine. I said, "I trust you," although everything inside me was clenching. He smiled and said, "Then we will go far." The next day he brought me flowers, just a bunch of daisies. "To put me in a good mood," he said, putting them on my desk. My colleagues noticed, and someone even whistled. Linda came over later and asked, "Is this a bonus?" I said I didn't know and went to work. Michael acted like everything was fine. He called me more often, demanded more, and I agreed. Listeners, you probably think I could refuse. But he promised a career, and I wanted to prove to myself that I could. It deepened everything, and I didn't see a way out. By the time I took on the project, my relationship with Michael had changed. He would approach me more often in the waiting room. He would come in the morning with a smile. "Anna, you look so smitten today." I would blush and say something like "thank you," but inside I felt warm. He wore shirts with the button undone, and I would notice how he would tense his shoulders to appear stronger. His cologne would linger around me even after he left. His flirtations would become more overt, and I would not stop him. A part of me was waiting for these moments. One day he stopped by my desk after lunch. "Anna, let's walk to the warehouse. We need to check something," he said. We left the office and walked across the yard. He walked beside me, closer than necessary, and said, "You're doing well, but I need more of your attention." His hand brushed mine as we walked. In the warehouse he showed me the boxes of goods, but then he turned and said, "You know I like you, right?" His voice was soft, and he looked into my eyes. I nodded, and he added, "We're good together, aren't we?" I didn't answer, but he smiled so hard my mouth went dry. That evening he came to me at the end of the workday. The office was already empty. It was about 7. "Anna, let's sit in the conference room. The reports can wait," he said. We went into a small room with a long table. He turned on the light and sat down next to me. "Are you tired?" he asked, moving closer. His knee touched mine under the table, and he did not move away. I said, "A little," and he said, "You try too hard. I like that about you." He put his hand on the table, his fingers almost touching mine. Then he leaned closer and said, "You are special, Anna. Do you feel like there is something between us?" I froze, his breath warm, too close. He brushed my hair off my shoulder, his fingers lingering on my neck. "You are so soft," he whispered, and his hand slid slowly down my back. I felt the heat of his touch, my heart pounding. He moved even closer, his face was so close that I could feel his breath on my skin. The tension grew, I couldn't move. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. It was a security guard, making his rounds. Michael exhaled, pulled back and said, "Damn, bad timing." He stood up, opened the door, talked to the man for a few minutes. I sat there, trying to collect my thoughts. When he came back, he looked at me and said, "Sorry, Anna, the interruption." I stood up, said I was going home, and he nodded, "See you tomorrow." The next day, he came up to me with coffee and said, "It was hot yesterday, huh?" I nodded, and he winked. Listeners, you probably think I might have left. But I stayed, and it pulled me deeper. By this time, I couldn't ignore what was going on between me and Michael. The tension hung in the air like a thick fog, and every glance or casual touch from him only added fuel to the fire. In the morning, he approached me not with the usual phrase, but with something new. He brought me coffee, but instead of simply setting the cup down, he leaned over and said quietly, "Anna, this scent reminds me of you, hot and inviting." His fingers slid around the rim of the cup, lingering near my hand, and he looked at me as if he already knew I wouldn't push him away. I took the coffee, murmuring a thank you, but my insides swirled at his words. That day, he decided to take me out of the office under a different pretext. "Anna, come with me to a client. I need to pick up some paperwork," he said after lunch, tossing the car keys into the air. We drove through the city, and he drove with one hand, the other resting on the armrest, too close to my elbow. "You don't mind driving with me like this, do you?" he asked, glancing in my direction. His voice was lower than usual, with a slight hoarseness. I answered, "No, it's okay," and he smiled, "Good, because I like having you around." When we stopped at a traffic light, his fingers accidentally brushed my wrist, and he lingered, leaving a warmth on my skin. The evening was a turning point. After work, he caught me at the exit of the office. "Anna, let's go to the archive. We need to find an old contract," he said, and we went down to the basement of the building. It was dark, only a weak light from a lamp in the corner. Shelves with folders surrounded us, and he closed the door behind him. "It's cramped in here, but cozy, right?" he began, coming closer. His shirt was unbuttoned 2 buttons, and I could see his chest rise. He stepped toward me, his hand resting on the shelf next to my head. "You know, Anna, I've been waiting for this moment for a long time," he whispered, leaning down so that his breath touched my ear. I froze, feeling his other hand slide around my waist, squeezing the fabric of my blouse. He moved even closer, his body almost pressed against mine. "You're so warm," he said, and his fingers ran up my thigh, lifting the hem of my skirt. I didn't resist. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. His hand tightened around my waist, pulling me closer to him, and I felt the hardness of his body through the fabric. "You want this too, admit it," he whispered, his face so close I could feel the heat of his skin. The moment was taut, like a string about to snap. He leaned lower, his hand moving higher up my thigh, and I shivered under his touch. Everything was building up to what was about to happen. And then there was a crash. The archive door swung open, the janitor dropped his mop as he walked in with a bucket. Michael recoiled, swearing under his breath, "Damn, what a day." The janitor apologized, said he didn't know we were there, and left. Michael looked at me, ran his hand through his hair, and said, "Anna, this is fate teasing us." I grabbed my bag, said I had to go, and walked out, my legs shaking. The next day, he came up to me with a smirk. "Yesterday was a bit of a stretch, huh? We'll keep going. Are you listening?" I couldn't believe how far I'd come. I wished I'd stopped it sooner, but part of me was angry that we'd been interrupted. Did I wish I could go back? Yes, but it was too late. And you know what? Deep down, I wanted this to happen, and it broke me. What happens next? You won't believe how everything will collapse. After that evening in the archives, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. It had all happened so fast, and yet nothing had happened. Michael acted as if it was just a game, and I was left with a lump in my throat and thoughts that wouldn't let me rest. The next morning, he came up to me in the office as if nothing had happened. "Anna, are you thoughtful today? Is everything okay?" he asked, setting a cup of coffee on my desk. His fingers brushed mine, and he smiled the same smile he always did. I said, "Yeah, I'm just tired," but he leaned closer and said, "You were great yesterday. Too bad we didn't finish." His voice was calm, but there was a hint of mockery in it. I turned away, and he went to his room. The days passed slowly after that. I did my job, answering phones, typing reports, but every time he passed, I could feel his gaze. He no longer called me anywhere in particular, but he found ways to remind me of that evening. One day, he left a note on my desk, "You know where to find me if you want to." I crumpled the paper and threw it away, but his words stuck in my head. My colleagues continued to whisper. "Linda once said out loud, 'You're the star of the office now, Anna,' and everyone laughed." I didn't respond, but inside I was seething. They didn't know the truth, but their words made me even more noticeable. I started thinking about my mother. She didn't suspect anything. In the evenings, she would call me, ask how things were at work, and praise Michael. "He takes such good care of you, Anna, you're lucky." I agreed, but every time after these calls, I felt a weight of guilt on my chest. Michael was her husband, and I was caught up in something I couldn't tell her about. I imagined what she would say if she found out. A divorce? A scandal? Or would she just stop talking to me? The thought gnawed at me, but I couldn't quit my job. I needed the money, and finding something new in our city was almost impossible. At the same time, part of me couldn't let go of what had happened. I remembered his hands on my waist, the warmth of his breath, and it stirred something strange in me. I was angry at myself for it. Did I want it to end? No, but yes. It confused me. I regretted agreeing to work with him, that I didn't leave sooner, but deep down there was a desire to return to that archive and find out what could have been. That was what scared me the most. I wanted everything to go back to how it was before, just a job, just a stepfather, just life. But I knew it wouldn't be like that. Listeners, you probably think it's my own fault. Maybe it is. I could have said no, I could have quit, but I stayed. Now I live with it, with the guilt that chokes me, and with the desire that I can't suppress. The tension has eased, but the story is not over. There will be more, I feel it. And I don't know if I want it or if I'm afraid.